Now, in this section, we're going to be talking about the some social change that was going on in the United States or the colonies after the Revolution. Now, when England's General Howe evacuated Boston in March of 1776, he took 1,100 refugees with him. Another 1,000 people loyal to their mother country followed the British Army out of Massachusetts, although 70,000 loyalists left the colonies during or after the war. The majority were members of old aristocratic families who had served the colony with distinction during the colonial period. The removal of colonists with much of the wealth and talent in society and government caused great changes in the country, and it cleared the way for new men to enter politics. Now, the destruction of the old social order reflected basic changes in society, changes that help explain the ideas and motives of the men who wrote the Constitution. Now, in England, built-in constitutional arrangements assured that the rights and freedoms of the people would be protected. The British Constitution was based on well-defined orders in society. Each branch of government representing one of these orders was balanced against the others. Thus, the king, or chief executive, represented royalty, the first order of society, and was the administrative branch of government. A nobility of hereditary aristocracy, whose stake in society was adequate safeguard against violent or unnecessary changes, checked his power. The aristocracy was represented in the House of Lords, which functioned as the upper house of the legislature. Finally, the common people, or third order of society, were represented in the House of Commons, which was able to check the power of crown and nobility. Thus, each social order with antagonistic interests checked the power of government to destroy liberty. Now, the British concept of balanced government also operated in the colonies. The colonial counterpart of the crown was the royal governor. A council representing the colonial aristocracy or elite checked his power, and they in turn were checked by the assembly representing the people. Now, these constitutional arrangements were considered the ideal form of government by all but a minority of radicals who questioned the whole system. What worried men of good faith was that one branch would get too much power and impose its will on the others. Now, the American Revolution, in effect, destroyed the balance between the various orders of society. The royal governors were forced to return to England, the colonial elite or aristocracy was discredited, and they either withdrew from politics or fled the country. Of the original three orders, only the common people were left. And this sudden restriction or restructuring of society was bound to create great problems in forming new governments. So who was left to check and control the power of the people? Now, in writing new state constitutions, many assumed that a new aristocracy, based on education and talent, would take the place of the old aristocracy. Many of the new constitutions provided for a Senate selected to ensure that its members were the wisest and most independent peoples of the state. Not every state made such provisions, however. Some, such as Pennsylvania, provided for only one house of the legislature, while others provided for senators with no different qualifications from those serving in the lower house. Now, it had once been assumed that men who would become leaders in colonial society would have the necessary education, social background, wealth, and natural habits and talents. But the revolution created a new breed of politician who lacked the qualification of the leaders during colonial times. Men whose claim to leadership was not based on their wealth, education, and social standing were rising to power and posing a threat to the old social hierarchy. This was the truly revolutionary change that worried the men who wrote the U.S. Constitution. Now, Patrick Henry, who rose from the backwoods to become governor of Virginia, and Samuel Adams, who became governor of Massachusetts after years of business failure, symbolized the new men in American politics. The founders were concerned that these new men would represent their own personal ambitions and interests, rather than looking objectively at what was best for society at large. These fears received their clearest expression when James Madison, the philosopher of the Constitution, in an essay known as Federalist 10. Now, Madison feared that special interest groups would replace the three orders destroyed by the Revolution. He called these special interest groups factions. Each faction, debtors, creditors, shippers, manufacturers, landless individuals, etc., would tend to think of what was good for their own group rather than for the society as a whole. The purpose of the Constitution, Madison argued, was to protect and preserve the public good against a faction consisting of the majority of the people, and at the same time to preserve the spirit and form of the popular government. Now, Madison's essay, one of the most frequently quoted political writings of U.S. history, expressed a dominant sentiment among the people who wrote the Constitution. He expressed the need for an order in society that required stifling what many thought was an excess of democracy, brought about by the destruction of the old order. In the next section, you'll read about Shays' Rebellion, which convinced many of the founders that a new constitution was necessary.